The intergalactic embassy of unified species was about as exciting as watching paint dry in zero gravity, which coincidentally was exactly what Zyx'thul had been doing for the past 3 hours. Some genius had decided that the embassy's new anti-gravity chamber needed a fresh coat of paint, and as senior regulatory compliance officer of Section 7B, it was their duty to ensure the paint dried according to subsection 458.9 of the Universal Building Maintenance Code. Zyx'thul's 4 eyes blinked in perfect sequence, left upper, right upper, left lower, right lower, a habit they developed over 12 cycles of mind-numbing, bureaucratic work. Their crystalline exoskeleton, usually gleaming with pride at their perfect record of rule adherence, had dulled slightly from boredom. The maintenance droid beside them beeped, what could only be interpreted as a snore. Paint drying observation, hour 3, Zyx'thul dictated into their official log. Molecular cohesion appears to be proceeding at exactly 0.003%, faster than regulation standard. Note to self, file report about potentially defective paint molecules. The droid's beeping snore grew louder. "Oh, shut up," Zyx'thul muttered, breaking their own rule about maintaining professional dialogue at all times. "At least you can switch to sleep mode. I have to—" The words died in their throat. Through the observation window, someone caught all 4 of their eyes at once, a feat previously thought physically impossible by crystalloid physiologists. A human diplomat was walking down the corridor, datapad in hand, completely absorbed in whatever fascinating thing humans found interesting these days, probably those cat videos that had somehow become the galaxy's most valued currency. But it wasn't the diplomat's activity that had Zyx'thul's crystalline heart creating unprecedented resonance patterns. It was everything else, the way they moved, so inefficient yet somehow graceful, the way they kept running their hand through their hair, a completely pointless action that Zyx'thul suddenly found absolutely fascinating. The way they nearly walked into a wall because they were so focused on their datapad, which should have been grounds for an immediate citation under Safety Protocol 223.7, but instead made Zyx'thul's internal temperature regulation system malfunction. "Warning, unauthorized elevation in core temperature detected," chirped their built-in health monitor. "Recommended action, review Section 12 of the Health and Safety Manual." "Override," Zyx'thul whispered, committing their first deliberate protocol violation in 12 cycles. The human looked up then, seeming to sense they were being watched. Their eyes met Zyx'thul's, all 4 of them, and they smiled. Not the practiced diplomatic smile Zyx'thul had catalogued in their Understanding Human Expressions mandatory training. No, this was something different, something real, something that made Zyx'thul forget about drying paint, protocol violations, and every single regulation they'd memorized since hatching. The maintenance droid, apparently having rebooted from its unauthorized nap, chose that moment to helpfully remind them, Regulation May 4th 67, extended eye contact with diplomatic personnel without prior written approval is strictly prohibited. For the first time in their life, Zyx'thul wondered if some rules were meant to be broken. The paint wasn't the only thing about to go against regulation standards. Over the next few solar rotations, Zyx'thul developed what their species would consider a severe case of protocol deviation syndrome. Their normally pristine schedule now included unauthorized detours past the human diplomatic wing, each carefully timed to coincide with the humans' coffee breaks, a ritual that both fascinated and horrified them. They willingly ingest heated bean juice containing psychoactive compounds, Zyx'thul muttered into their personal research log, which they'd hidden inside a copy of Regulatory Guidelines for Waste Management Systems, and they seemed to require multiple doses throughout the day. Possible addiction, need more data. Their research into human behavior had become somewhat obsessive. Their private data terminal now contained hundreds of hours of Earth entertainment media, carefully categorized by genre, emotional impact, and number of times humans did that weird thing with their faces that made their teeth show. "Computer, explain human smiling again," Zyx'thul commanded during their off-duty hours. "Baring of teeth in humans indicates happiness, amusement, or social bonding," the computer droned. "This differs from your species' tradition of vibrating your crystalline structure at precisely 432 Hz to express joy. But why does it make my internal resonance chamber feel like it's full of fizzing stellar debris? Query unclear. Please rephrase or consult the medical bay for possible radiation exposure." Zyx'thul's attempts to understand human culture led to several notable incidents. There was the time they tried to participate in the human tradition of small talk in the elevator. The atmospheric pressure regulation system is functioning within acceptable parameters today, they had said proudly, having practiced the line for hours. The human had looked up from their datapad and replied, "Yeah, way better than yesterday's rain of interdimensional slugs." Zyx'thul had nearly short-circuited trying to file an emergency report about an interdimensional slug breach before realizing it was something called sarcasm, a concept that required them to create an entirely new filing system in their mental database. Then there was the disastrous attempt to understand human fashion. After noticing the humans' appreciation for something called vintage band t-shirts, Zyx'thul had attempted to modify their standard-issue crystalline uniform with decorative etchings of Earth musical groups. The resulting disciplinary hearing had lasted 6 hours and added 3 new subsections to the dress code regulations. But nothing compared to the coffee incident. In an attempt to understand the humans' daily ritual, Zyx'thul had secretly obtained a cup of coffee from the embassy cafeteria. Their species wasn't technically supposed to consume Earth beverages, but they had calculated that the potential insights gained outweighed the 0.03% chance of molecular destabilization. The results had been explosive, literally. Maintenance Report 2947B, their supervisor had dictated later. Cause of destruction of executive bathroom, unauthorized coffee consumption by crystalloid staff member, leading to temporary transformation into living strobe light. Addendum. New regulation needed regarding humans keeping their bean-based weapons of mass destruction away from impressionable junior staff. Yet despite the growing list of protocol violations and the concern messages from their podmates back home, Zyx'thul couldn't stop. Each new discovery about humans, their music, their jokes, their inexplicable need to anthropomorphize everything from cleaning robots to deadly space anomalies, only made them want to learn more. The final straw came during the annual Embassy Cultural Exchange Festival. Zyx'thul had been assigned to monitor the regulation-mandated fun levels when they overheard the human explaining something called dancing to a group of bewildered methane breathers. "You just move without filing a motion plan?" one of the methane breathers had asked, their gas clouds swirling in confusion. "Sometimes you even move without thinking at all," the human had replied, demonstrating with a simple sway that had Zyx'thul's crystalline structure humming at completely non-regulation frequencies. That night, alone in their quarters, Zyx'thul made their first completely spontaneous decision ever. They were going to learn to dance, and the fact that this violated exactly 47 different regulations was, for once, entirely beside the point. The embassy gardens were less of a garden and more of a carefully controlled experiment in interplanetary botany gone wrong. Plants from 100 different worlds competed for space in climate-controlled bubbles, each one labeled with at least 12 warning signs and a small novel's worth of safety procedures. It was precisely the kind of over-regulated environment where Zyx'thul usually felt most at home. Usually. Today they were breaking approximately 153 regulations just by being there during off hours. Their crystalline structure was vibrating at such an irregular frequency that they were pretty sure they were creating new subsections in the regulatory code just by existing. "Remember," they muttered to themselves, "humans appreciate punctuality within a fluid range of approximately 5–10 minutes around the agreed-upon meeting time. Being exactly on time might be considered, what was the word? Yes, creepy." They had spent 3 days calculating the perfect amount of time to arrive late. The result? 7 minutes and 23 seconds past the arranged meeting time. Not that they had been counting every excruciating second since they'd found the mysterious note on their desk. "Gardens, Thursday, after hours. Bring your sense of adventure and maybe some snacks." The human was already there, sitting on a bench near the Venusian vapor roses, which were releasing their signature sparkly spores in blatant violation of Section 34.2 regarding atmospheric containment protocols. Zyx'thul's internal compliance monitor nearly went into override. "You came." The human's face did that teeth-showing thing that still made Zyx'thul's molecular structure feel unstable. "I was worried you might file a report about the note instead." I did, Zyx'thul admitted, but I filed it under miscellaneous non-threatening human customs instead of security breaches requiring immediate action. The human laughed, another fascinating phenomenon that Zyx'thul had spent weeks studying. That's probably the most romantic thing anyone's ever done with paperwork. Romantic? Zyx'thul's universal translator glitched momentarily. This is a categorization error. Romance requires filing Form 89C in triplicate and obtaining approval from the Interspecies Relations Board. Is that what you want this to be? Just another form to file? For the first time in their life, Zyx'thul wished their species was capable of producing those water leak things humans call tears. It would have been an appropriate moment for them, according to their research. I brought snacks, they said instead, pulling out a carefully curated selection of human-safe treats they'd requisitioned through increasingly creative interpretations of the supply request guidelines. You brought Twinkies to our first date? The human's expression indicated either extreme pleasure or mild food poisoning. Zyx'thul was still working on distinguishing the two. That's it. I'm officially smitten. Smitten is not a recognized status in any official capacity, Zyx'thul pointed out, while their internal systems ran wild, trying to process the word date. What followed was the most protocol-breaking hour of Zyx'thul's existence. They learned that humans had a game called 20 questions, which was really just interrogation without the required forms. They discovered that their crystalline structure could produce rainbow refractions when they laughed, not the regulated expression of mild amusement permitted by statute. The human taught them something called a fist bump, which was like a formal handshake but violated at least 20 different safety protocols. Zyx'thul's attempt to reciprocate nearly shattered their left appendage, but the resulting sound of human laughter made the potential disciplinary action seem worth it. Then came the dancing. No, you don't need to calculate the exact angle of your movements, the human said, guiding Zyx'thul's crystalline form in what they claimed was a simple sway. But Regulation 472.1 clearly states that all physical movement must be feel the music instead. That's not a measurable metric, but somehow between one regulation-violating moment and the next, Zyx'thul found themselves moving without consulting a single protocol. Their crystalline structure caught the artificial moonlight, sending prismatic patterns across the garden walls. The human's hand was warm against their cool surface, and for once, they didn't even think about filing a temperature variance report. That's when the garden's automatic lighting switched to full power, flooding the area with harsh white light. Security sweep in progress, announced the automated system. All personnel must present valid authorization or face immediate detention. Quick! The human pulled Zyx'thul behind a cluster of Jovian jump jellies, which immediately began humming in harmony with Zyx'thul's panicked resonance. Ambassador Crixenor's voice echoed through the gardens. The energy readings from this sector are highly irregular. Conduct a full sweep. Pressed close together in their hiding spot, Zyx'thul could feel the human's heart racing. Another fascinating biological function they'd have loved to study if they weren't about to be discovered and probably converted into paperweight as punishment. I apologize for implicating you in multiple regulatory violations, Zyx'thul whispered. Are you kidding? This is the most fun I've had since that time I convinced the methane breathers that hiccups were a sign of diplomatic respect. The human's hand found theirs just as Ambassador Crixenor's crystalline form refracted light around their hiding spot. In that moment, Zyx'thul made another spontaneous decision. They began to vibrate at exactly the same frequency as the jump jellies. Nothing but some malfunctioning xenoflora, Crixenor reported. Schedule a maintenance check and file the appropriate paperwork. After the all-clear sounded, they emerged from their hiding spot. The human's hair was slightly disheveled, their clothing wrinkled, all violations of diplomatic dress code that Zyx'thul found strangely appealing. Same time next week, the human asked. Zyx'thul knew they should say no, should file a self-report, should request a transfer to the Department of watching paint dry on other planets. Instead, they said, I'll bring more Twinkies. Some protocols they were learning were worth breaking. The summons came during what humans would call the worst possible moment, right as Zyx'thul was learning about something called slow dancing in the allegedly secure maintenance corridor of Level 7. The official notification crystallized in the air with an ominous chime, its edges sharp enough to slice through both the moment and Zyx'thul's remaining hopes of keeping their unauthorized happiness a secret. Immediate appearance required before the High Council of Crystalloid Conduct and Regulatory Affairs. That doesn't sound good, the human murmured, their hand still resting where it had been teaching Zyx'thul's crystalline form about the concept of leading in dance. The Council uses exactly 47% more capital letters than standard communications, Zyx'thul observed, their voice resonating at frequencies generally reserved for announcing imminent planetary destruction. This exceeds even the formatting guidelines for catastrophic events. The council chamber was exactly as welcoming as a black hole with bureaucratic tendencies. 7 elder crystalloids sat in formation, their structures casting prismatic judgments across the room. Grand Administrator Zyx'thul, whose very crystalline angles screamed disapproval, spoke first. Senior Regulatory Compliance Officer Zyx'thul, they began, each syllable precisely calibrated to induce maximum shame. You stand accused of 2,947 violations of the sacred protocols. 2,948, Zyx'thul corrected automatically, then immediately regretted their continued dedication to accuracy. Including, Zyx'thul continued, their tone suggesting they'd just found something particularly disgusting stuck to their crystalline surface, unauthorized emotional resonance with a human diplomatic officer, non-regulation movement patterns classified as dancing and, most egregiously, the consumption of a substance known as Twinkies without filing the proper digestive intent forms. The evidence crystals projected their crimes in high definition. Zyx'thul and the human in the gardens, in the maintenance corridors, sharing banned earth snacks, laughing at non-regulation intervals. Each image should have filled them with shame. Instead, they felt their structure vibrating with something else entirely: defiance. Your punishment has been predetermined in accordance with Section 9847 of the Crystalloid Conduct Code, announced Council Member Zyx'thul. Immediate termination of your position, exile to the Outer Rim mining colonies, and mandatory participation in the annual conference on proper protocol prosecution, where your case will be presented as a cautionary tale. However, interjected Council Member HFY, their tone suggesting they were offering a particularly generous alternative to being thrown into a supernova, given your previously immaculate record, we are prepared to be lenient. Renounce all contact with the human, submit to complete molecular restructuring to remove these inappropriate emotional patterns, and accept reassignment to the Department of Watching Paint Dry on Gas Giants. Your record will be amended to show only a minor violation of calendar management protocols. The chamber fell silent, 7 pairs of crystalline eyes fixed on Zyx'thul, waiting for the obviously correct choice to be made. After all, no crystalloid had ever chosen anything or anyone over the sacred protocols, but no crystalloid had ever learned to dance or laugh without filing the appropriate forms, or discovered that happiness didn't need to be quantified in triplicate to be real. Zyx'thul's structure began to vibrate, not with fear or shame, but with something that would require an entirely new filing system to categorize. They thought about regulation-free smiles, about warm hands guiding cold crystal through impossible movements, about joy that couldn't be contained in any number of forms. By the sacred protocols, gasped Council Member Tixmar, they're resonating at frequencies reserved for Class A emotional emergencies. I choose, Zyx'thul announced, their voice carrying harmonics never before heard in the council chamber, to file a formal request for protocol amendment. On what grounds? Demanded Zyx'thul. On the grounds that some things can't be regulated, like love or dancing, or the way humans can make even the most rule-bound crystalloid realize that life is meant to be lived, not just documented. The Council's collective horror manifested as a shower of sparkles from their shocked structures. Also, Zyx'thul added, their crystal form now glowing with what could only be described as extremely non-regulation determination. Twinkies are worth every single violation report in the galaxy. The thing about bureaucrats is they never expect anyone to actually run. Their protocols, procedures, and punishment algorithms all assume that the guilty party will stand there, accept their fate, and file the appropriate paperwork for their own doom, which is exactly why Zyx'thul's mad dash from the council chamber caused such spectacular chaos. Unauthorized locomotion in progress, blared the security system, clearly struggling to categorize what was happening. Crystalloid moving at error. Speed exceeds permitted parameters. Zyx'thul burst through the chamber doors, their crystalline form catching the light and creating an impromptu disco effect in the corridors. Behind them, they could hear the council members attempting to organize a pursuit while staying within proper procedural guidelines. "We must file a chase authorization form," shouted one council member. "But which one?" wailed another. "Is this a Class C mild pursuit or a Class A critical apprehension? Check the appendices." Thanks to their countless protocol violations over the past months, Zyx'thul knew exactly where to find their human. The embassy cafeteria. It was afternoon coffee time, after all. They had approximately 7.3 minutes before the council figured out the proper paperwork for an interspecies manhunt. They skidded into the cafeteria, shocking a group of methane breathers into releasing stress clouds that set off every environmental alarm in the sector. "We need to leave, now." Zyx'thul grabbed their human's hand, causing them to spill their coffee. "I may have just committed the first ever escape from a council judgment session. Also, I think I invented a new category of crime." "That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me," the human grinned, already running alongside them. "Please tell me you have a plan." "I have approximately 27% of a plan." "Close enough." They raced through the embassy corridors, their escape aided by the most unlikely of allies. The maintenance droids, whom Zyx'thul had always treated with respect and proper documentation, mysteriously malfunctioned in ways that just happened to obstruct their pursuers. The methane breathers, still amused by the humans' hiccup prank, created strategic gas clouds at crucial intersections. Even the Venusian vapor roses got in on the action, releasing their spores in a spectacular display that one council member would later describe in their incident report as a botanical mutiny of unprecedented proportions. But it was the Blob Collective from Sector 9 that proved most helpful. As Zyx'thul and their human rounded a corner to find their path blocked by security forces, the entire collective oozed down from the ceiling. "What's the meaning of this?" demanded the head of security. "Mandatory corridor maintenance," announced the Blob Collective in perfect unison. "Estimated completion time, however long it takes our friends to reach Hangar Bay 7. "But there's no maintenance scheduled." "Would you like to file a complaint? We have 8,947 forms you must complete first." The security team, recognizing bureaucratic warfare when they saw it, backed down immediately. As they approached Hangar Bay 7, they found Bob the quantum mechanic waiting beside his ship. Bob, being a sentient quantum probability field, technically wasn't supposed to exist on Tuesdays, but he'd always had a soft spot for romance. "Your probability of successful escape is approximately 12.7%, Bob flickered cheerfully. "I've adjusted the quantum manifold to improve those odds to at least 15.3%. Also, I filled the cabin with snacks." Halt! The council had finally arrived, led by Grand Administrator Zyx'thul, who was clutching what appeared to be every violation form in existence. "This escape attempt violates at least 73 different protocols." 74, Zyx'thul corrected, unable to help themselves even now. "You forgot the subsection about unauthorized snack transportation." "Permission to be awesome," the human whispered, reaching for something in their pocket. "I don't think that requires a permit," Zyx'thul replied, experiencing yet another unauthorized emotion, as they watched their human pull out a small music player. The opening notes of "Never Gonna Give You Up" blasted through the hangar's speakers. The council members recoiled in horror at the unauthorized musical interference. Did you just rickroll the highest authority of my species?" Zyx'thul asked, their crystalline structure vibrating with joy. "I've been saving that for a special occasion." As they dashed up the ship's ramp, Bob's quantum field fluctuating with amusement, Zyx'thul turned back one last time. "I hereby submit my resignation," they announced formally. "I filed it under things I never thought I'd do, but am absolutely certain are right." "That's not a real category," shrieked Zyx'thul. "It is now," Zyx'thul replied, their crystal form glowing with all the colors of defiant happiness. "I just created it. Feel free to file a complaint about it. In triplicate, of course." The last thing the council heard as the ship took off was the sound of their most rule-abiding officer learning to sing along to 1980s pop music. Adjusting to Earth life was like trying to file paperwork in zero gravity, while juggling quantum uncertainties, theoretically possible but practically chaotic. Zyx'thul's first week on Earth produced enough cultural misunderstandings to fill 17 volumes of How Not to Blend In with Humans. Their first challenge was housing. The real estate agent had been remarkably professional about showing apartments to a crystalline alien lifeform, though she did suggest they might want to avoid rooms with disco balls for the safety of other residents' retinas. And this is what humans call a bathroom, their human explained during the tour. Though I'm not sure you'll need it since you don't, I would like to install a mineral polishing station, Zyx'thul declared, and perhaps a small dehumidifier. Moisture makes me squeaky. The neighbors quickly grew accustomed to the sound of crystalline humming from apartment 4B, though there was that one incident where Zyx'thul's attempt at singing in the shower created a harmonic frequency that made all the local dogs howl in perfect pitch. Then came the dreaded meeting the family ritual, which required more preparation than a planetary alignment ceremony. Zyx'thul spent weeks studying human family dynamics and memorizing appropriate conversation topics. Remember, they muttered to themselves on the drive to their human's family home, Earth mothers appreciate compliments about their cooking, but do not ask for the exact chemical composition of the food, and do not, under any circumstances, attempt to file a taste assessment report. The actual dinner went surprisingly well, aside from a few minor incidents. Like when Zyx'thul complimented the turkey by scientifically analyzing its protein structure, or when they tried to bond with their human's teenage brother by explaining the mathematical beauty of his video game's physics engine failures. So, their human's father had asked, "What are your intentions toward my child?" Zyx'thul, prepared for this question, pulled out a 400-page relationship manifesto they'd prepared, complete with charts, graphs, and a 15-year projection of shared happiness metrics. The family stared in bewilderment as they began their PowerPoint presentation. They had me at the pie chart about long-term compatibility factors, their human later told the amused family. Daily life brought its own series of adventures. Grocery shopping became an expedition worthy of diplomatic documentation. Zyx'thul insisted on reading every ingredient list and calculating nutritional ratios, much to the confusion of other shoppers. Why do humans need 17 different varieties of cereal, they demanded one day, and why does each one claim to be essential for a balanced breakfast? The math doesn't add up. Their attempts to understand human entertainment led to particularly memorable moments. During their first movie night, they provided running commentary on the scientific impossibilities in the sci-fi film, until their human gently explained that sometimes things just look cool. The local park became their favorite study spot for human behavior. They took notes on everything, from children's playground dynamics to dog-walking protocols. Their presence initially startled some park-goers, but they soon became a familiar sight, especially after they started offering incredibly detailed weather predictions based on their crystalline sensitivity to atmospheric conditions. "No, Mrs. Johnson, you don't need an umbrella today. My upper left facet clearly indicates only a 2.3% chance of precipitation." Work proved another interesting challenge. While their organizational skills were unmatched, their literal interpretation of office policies caused some confusion. "Zyx'thul, when I said let's tackle this project, I didn't mean physically wrestle with the paperwork," their supervisor explained after one memorable incident. "But you said it was an aggressive deadline," they protested, surrounded by scattered documents. "I was showing appropriate dominance over the timeline." Their humans' friends quickly warmed to them, especially after discovering their unique talents. They became the group's unofficial designated driver, being physically incapable of intoxication. Calculator, faster than any smartphone, and light show at parties, though they had to be careful not to get too excited and accidentally create a laser display. The most challenging adjustment was understanding human idioms. Their human kept a running list of Zyx'thul's literal interpretations. Break a leg led to a concerned call to the hospital. It's raining cats and dogs caused a panic about atmospheric animal displacement. Time flies when you're having fun resulted in a 3-hour lecture about the impossibility of temporal insects. But their favorite Earth discovery was dancing in the rain. The first time it happened, their human had to convince them that water falling from the sky wasn't a catastrophic environmental failure. requiring immediate documentation. But my surface will get wet, they had protested. That's the point. As they stood there, refracting raindrops into tiny rainbows, their human teaching them how to splash in puddles, Zyx'thul realized something profound. Earth's chaos wasn't a bug in the system. It was the feature. I think I finally understand why humans don't file paperwork for everything, they announced. Oh, some things are better experienced than documented. That might be the most human thing you've ever said. I know, I'm both proud and slightly concerned. 1 year, 3 months and 17 days after their dramatic escape, not that they were counting, Zyx'thul received an official crystalline transmission. The message arrived during breakfast, materializing between the coffee pot and their attempt at making human-style toast. Oh no, they said, watching the crystal pulse with the unmistakable frequency of high council communications. They've finally finished processing the paperwork for my capture. Their human looked up from their morning coffee. Want me to rickroll them again? Before Zyx'thul could respond, the crystal projected a full-size image of Grand Administrator HFY into their kitchen. Several pieces of toast fell through the hologram. Former Senior Regulatory Compliance Officer Zyx'thul, HFY began, then paused, noting the domestic scene. Are you wearing an apron with "Kiss the Cook" written on it? It was a gift, Zyx'thul replied defensively. I've filed it under treasured personal items. That's not even a real category. HFY's crystalline structure flickered with distress. Never mind. We have received your unusual petition. Petition? The one you filed before your unauthorized departure. The request for protocol amendment regarding interspecies relationships. It has taken us 14 months to process due to its unprecedented nature, and because someone filed it under things that will never happen instead of pending legislative proposals. Zyx'thul's structure vibrated with anticipation. Their human reached over and took their hand, a gesture that would have scandalized the council if they weren't already scandalized by everything else. After extensive deliberation, HFY continued, and an unexpected wave of support from various embassy staff, including an extremely persistent blob collective and a quantum mechanic who technically doesn't exist, we have decided to approve the amendment. The kitchen was silent, except for the sound of another piece of toast falling through HFY's hologram. Furthermore, the Grand Administrator added, looking like every word caused them physical pain, we are offering you reinstatement, with a new position, Head of Interspecies Cultural Relations. You want me to come back? Zyx'thul's voice hit frequencies previously unknown to crystalline biology. With conditions, HFY clarified, you must establish proper protocols for human-crystalloid interaction, document successful integration strategies, create guidelines for dancing. Let me guess, their human interjected, grinning, all in triplicate. Naturally, HFY's hologram turned to address them directly. We have also created 17 new forms specifically for human-crystalloid partnerships. They only need to be filed quarterly. Zyx'thul looked at their human, then back at HFY. I accept on one condition. You are not in a position to make conditions. I am now the only expert in human-crystalloid relations in the galaxy, Zyx'thul pointed out. Also, I have pictures of the council doing the Macarena during last year's unauthorized party in the embassy gardens. HFY's structure briefly turned an impossible shade of embarrassed. State your condition. The new protocols must include mandatory dance breaks and Twinkies in the embassy cafeteria. That's 2 conditions, HFY pointed out. I'll file a correction form. Later that evening, as they celebrated with their human and an assortment of snacks that violated at least 12 different trade regulations, Zyx'thul made an announcement. I've created a new filing system, they declared proudly. Oh, their human looked amused. For what? Love, Zyx'thul replied, their crystal structure glowing with all the colors of happiness. It's filed under things that don't need paperwork. That's not very bureaucratic of you. I know, I blame your influence entirely. I've already drafted a report about it, and of course you have. And so, in a small Earth apartment filled with the unlikely combination of regulation manuals and disco balls, a human and a crystalline alien discovered that sometimes the best protocols are the ones you write together, even if you have to file them in triplicate.